Welcome all of you to this session on Vedas. And really speaking, as Lalaji has pointed out in his book, there is no way to characterize Vedas except as saying that this is truth eternal. Vedas are nothing but truth eternal. This view is somewhat echoed also by Swami Vivekananda, where he mentions that by Vedas, we don't mean just a four written book. By Vedas, what we mean is that process, that body of knowledge which enables humans to expand their consciousness and understanding of life beyond what they are normally aware of. So, in this spirit, today what we'll try and do is to understand Vedas more from the perspective of the overall Indian tradition and uh, and and see where the place of Vedas lie, because most of us would have heard the term Vedas, but unlike say the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, of which we are familiar with the actual content of Ramayana and Mahabharata, very few of us would have either seen the book on Vedas or might have even read components or parts of the Vedic text. I'm talking of the four Vedas that we normally refer to. So, in that context, it's very important to understand where Vedas lie in the overall Vedic literature. So, the Vedic literature is essentially divided into two parts. One, what we call as Shruti, and the other, which we call as Smriti. Now, if you look at Shruti, the word in Sanskrit actually what it means is what has been heard. And Smriti, the word Smriti means in Sanskrit that which is remembered. Now, Shruti was something which passed, where the inherent principle of a Shruti is that these are eternal laws. For example, if we relate it to the modern worldly context, we have this law of gravity where we know that the force of acceleration of the Earth is 9.8 meters per second square, and it is not going to change over time. Similarly, all that is written in the Shruti text are facts and laws of nature, and these laws of nature are not going to change over time. The second class of text in Vedic literature is called Smriti. Now, Shruti, they are independent, they stand all by themselves because they are natural law. You cannot ask, for example, why the force of gravity is 9.8 meters per second square. Whereas Smriti, it depends on somebody. So, for example, we have a Manu Smriti, for whom the writer is supposed to be Manu, the first human. And there is again a classification within the Smriti text. So, Smriti texts are not absolute truths which will last forever. And this is an important distinction because it has very, very important social, political, and spiritual implications for the practitioners and non-practitioners alike, which we will discuss as we will go along. Now, in the Vedic literature, the Vedas are called the Shruti, which means they have been passed on from generation to generation in the Guru Shishya Parampara, where the Guru taught this using the oral tradition. A lot of this knowledge was also transmitted through a process which we find glimpses of in the Mahabharata. So, for example, in the Mahabharata, there is a reference that Yudhishthir wanted to transmit a certain Vidya to Arjun. All he said was, you sit down and meditate with me for 30 minutes. And at the end of 30 minutes, he said, this Vidya is now transferred to you. In the Shruti tradition, a lot of knowledge was transmitted either orally and sometimes through this process of inner connection, which we have glimpses of in the spiritual practice we follow, which is Sahaj Marg. Now, Smriti also contains a vast body of text. Now, within Smriti, the body of text that we might have heard of but probably not ever read, there is a set of literature which is called Shastra. So, for example, you have Natya Shastra, Artha Shastra, Dharma Shastra. Now, Shastras are something which are not eternal. They are for a period of time, it is written by somebody, and Shastras change over a period of time, and they can change over a period of time. So, there was a civilization which was a Vedic civilization, which was not essentially a consumerist civilization. Today we are sitting on a consumerist civilization. So all our shastras on how should our relationships be with the family, with our neighbors, with our colleagues at work, and so on need to be rewritten, and it is perfectly in line with the Smriti framework that a shastra can be rewritten based on the modern needs. In the Vedic time, the Natya Shastra, the medium of delivery was only a physical display. Today we have recording mechanisms, and Natya Shastra can be very clearly rewritten in order to deliver or cater to an audience which can see it through videos, which can see it through 3Ds, and so on, or through electronic channels. Whereas this is not possible with Shruti. Shruti, whatever the content in Shruti is, it is eternal. It cannot change over a period of time. Now, just like we have Shastras, we have what are called 18 Puranas. And these Puranas, again, they are Smriti texts. The tradition does not claim that these are Shrutis, but it claims that these are based on the Itihasas. And I'll explain what is the role of Itihasa. So, what it essentially means is that Purans have an element of a very important element of actual facts, but these facts could have been dramatized. So, to relate it to our modern context, let's think of a person like Rahul Gandhi, who is very often caricaturized or made fun of. Now, to make fun of him, we might create a cartoon, but there is a central real character in the name of Rahul Gandhi, but a cartoon may be an exaggeration of what he may have said or done, which may not be the reality, but it might essentially just bring out a certain point. So, Puranas, while they rest on certain historical truths, they do not claim to be 100% itihasa, which means as it happened or factually correct. There could be embellishments in the Puranas to make them to make a particular point which may not be historically accurate. Then we have what we call the Smriti text, which again define our social codes, and Manu Smriti is one such very reviled document. There are almost 2,000 stanzas or 2,000 verses, 6,000 verses in Manu Smriti, and two or three of them are abusive verses, but those have been largely publicized. Whereas Manu Smriti, if you look at the whole text, contains codes of conduct, and it very clearly states that these code of conducts can change depending on place or time. So, for example, Babuji in one of his texts has written that if somebody was living in the North Pole, probably his diet will be a non-vegetarian diet, and that would be perfectly fine. So he's essentially changing the Manu Smriti and saying the social code of living or of ahar, say in a North Pole, will be different from the social code that is prevalent in better climates. Another very important and a critical component of Smriti is what is called itihas. Now, itihas, what it means is the word itihas comes from the Sanskrit term iti plus has, which means iti means as it and has means happened, as it happened. Now, itihas claims to be, and essentially in our context, it is the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Now, what the tradition very clearly and unambiguously claims is that itihas is nothing but a record of historical facts. It does not claim any exaggeration on those facts, like in the case of Puranas. So, this is how the overall Vedic literature is characterized, and Vedas form the Shruti component of this Vedic text. Now, as I said earlier, this Vedic literature was all guru to disciple, either via the oral tradition or through the spiritual tradition. Now, at the time of Mahabharata, Ved Vyas, also called Krishna Dwapayan Vyas, he codified all the knowledge, and he undertook a huge project to codify all the knowledge in the Vedas. So what he did is the first time these texts, the Vedas, were divided into four parts, which were called Rig Ved, Sam Ved, Yajur Ved, and Athar Ved. and they were historically documented for the first time. But do remember, this does not mean that Vedas are written by Ved Vyas. Ved Vyas never claims that he wrote the Vedas, unlike the Mahabharata. Mahabharata, he is the author of Mahabharata, but he is not the author of Vedas. Vedas being Shruti texts, these were uh, natural laws revealed to rishis in higher states of consciousness, and in some sense, we can say Ved Vyas just compiled that particular knowledge or information. So, as we go into Vedas a little more, one of the very important characteristics of Vedas is that they are aparushe. What it means in Sanskrit is that there is no author of the Vedas. These are divine truths revealed to rishis and rishikas of primitive, of a very old origin, of a timeless origin, and these were codified and compiled by Ved Vyas in modern times in the form of a written text. Now, remember, a lot of these people who got or who are mentioned in the rishis who are mentioned in the Vedas, they're also women. At least 64 women can be identified in the Vedic text, which means they were also rishis and they also had very high states of consciousness. Now, the second important part of Vedas is that it is the tradition claims that it is timeless. And if we refer to Lalaji Maharaj also, he again talks about that Vedas is nothing but Om. Now, what is Om? We will discuss a little more in detail, but just to suggest that Om is nothing but the primordial vibration at the time of. So when the first stir happened, at that time, the vibration that rose was Om. Om is not a sound, but it was a vibration. And our rishis, in their enormous, you can say, mercy, noted or converted that vibration into a sound form with the idea that as this vibration is practiced in a sound form by humans, it will more and more replicate the original state of humans at the time of creation, which means it will bring humans near the center. Now, if you look at the Western scholars, if we try, so while the tradition claims that Vedas are timeless, they go into antiquity, the Western scholars have put the time frame of Vedas at 1500 BC, which means what they claim is that Vedas were written sometime around 1500 BC. Now, the interesting part of these claims is that never, when these claims of this date of 1500 BC is made, never is a proof offered. It's just a speculation. And even the writers, in most of the times, they will say, we are speculating, we don't know. But it is normally in our normal day-to-day media reports and others, it is taken as gospel truth or something that that is accepted worldwide. Now, if you look at the Indian scholars, there's a vast difference between the timelines they have put, and the timelines start from 7000 BC to antiquity. Antiquity means it's hundreds and thousands of years old. When I say hundreds and thousands, it means it goes even to lakhs of years since the Vedas came into existence. Now, the Indian scholars, when they make certain claims, they are based on astrological observations of the sky or astronomical observations of the sky. Now, this date of 7000 BC, for example, describes the Rig Vedic hymn, which describes the position of stars in the sky. Now, in modern days, there are software available where you can put down the position of the stars in the sky, and it will tell you on what date was the sky looking in that particular form. And based on this, the earliest date for Rig Veda is taken down by Indian scholars is about 7000 BC. Now, please note that our timeline itself has been disturbed as a result of the British occupation of India. And now our calendars no longer follow the Vedic model. Now, one very important characteristics of Vedas is that these are the oldest texts available to humans. There is no text which predates, which is known to humans at this point, which predates the Vedas, and there is fair amount of ambiguity. There's fair amount of clarity or agreement between scholars about this point. Now, most of us, since we have not gone through the Vedas. I'll just summarize that each Veda is comprised of four different components. The first one is called Samhita. Now, Samhita is nothing but a set of mantras which, when invoked, lead to a particular result. Now, each Samhita or each mantra is associated with two very important components. One is there is a Rishi of that particular Samhita, which means that is the Rishi who knows everything about that particular mantra. And the second is a Devta associated with that particular Samhita, which brings about the particular result. The second important component of each Veda is what is called the Brahmana. What it means is that this is the ritualistic portion. So, which means there is a mantra and you want a particular result, then you have to follow a certain ritual or a yajna. And that yajna is the Brahmanas describe that particular yajna. What are the main requirements of that yajna? Who is the Rishi? Who is the Devta? What kind of altar has to be built? And these are, so this you can say is the ritualistic portion of the Vedas. And the third component, as we move from ritualistic, we move to what are called Aryakanas. What essentially is now it is moving towards from a ritual to a philosophy. And Aryakanas is nothing but a forest dwelling in which question answers start happening, where a student asks his guru about certain philosophical concepts, and the guru tends to answer that in a forest dwelling. And from the Aryakanas, it moves to what we call an Upanishad, which is the last part of each Veda, which is nothing but a philosophical treatise between a guru and a disciple. Now, the last part, the Upanishads, they are also called Vedant because they form the last part of the Vedas. So, the word Vedant comes from end of Vedas, which is Vedant, and Upanishads form, they are also called the Vedant. In modern times, yogis like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa or Vivekananda have focused a lot on the Vedant. So when we hear the word Vedant, it essentially refers to the Upanishads, which essentially are largely the last part of each of the four Vedas. Now, Vedas have been subject to attack. So while the Indian tradition, Vedas are considered to be the highest creation of people with very, very high levels of consciousness, and they are considered as a treasure of knowledge, beauty, art, literature, and all things higher in life. Vedas have been attacked in history at three different intervals and points in time. So the first, there was they grew in India, a group of people who were called Charvaks. And Charvaks is one of the four darshans, or one of the six darshans in Indian philosophy. So they claimed that Vedas, they did not accept the authority of the Vedas. Remember, the Sanatan tradition accepts that Vedas are Shruti and they are the highest truth embodied. They contain the highest levels of truth. Now, Charvaks questioned the Vedas and they did not accept that Vedas as to be the highest form of knowledge. The next set of people who came and challenged the Vedas were the Buddhists. And both these traditions more or less lost out in India. And Shankaracharya was very important in facilitating the end of, or marking the end of Buddhism in India, using the tools available in the Vedas. So he had arguments with Buddhist scholars, and there's a very famous argument between Shankaracharya and a gentleman called Pandit Mandan Mishra, who was a Buddhist. He had 7 days of arguments with him, where his wife, Mandan Mishra's wife, was the judge. And in the end, the debate in those days, what happened was that if a debate was lost by a person, that person had to convert to the point of view of the person to whom he had lost. So once Mandan Mishra lost, who was the highest scholar or most well-known scholar of Buddhism at that time, once he lost the debate to Adi Shankaracharya, he converted to the Vedic way of life, and that is assumed or is considered by scholars to have dealt a body blow to Buddhism in India. Do remember, at some point in history, India was largely Buddhist. The majority of the population was Buddhist, and today we don't find the same situation. The third attack on the so essentially the first two attacks on Veds were homegrown, which means they were they originated out of the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, whereas the third attack is largely sponsored by Western Indologists and their Indian collaborators, and this has is a very sinister attack. And initially, the forces which were causing this attack on the Vedic way or the Vedas was a superiority complex in the West. And there were social theories in the West which were propounded by a person called Hegel, who essentially said that the white people of the West, they are the most evolved race and they will therefore rule the world. And anything else found elsewhere cannot be of value. In line with that tradition, there were authors like Max Muller, etc., who tried to bring out the issues in the Vedas. And one very simple point of attack was that they created an image or created, you can say, marketing plan, which said that Hindus worship the forces of nature out of fear. And that is a very primitive idea, which is that in the Vedas, you have God like Varun, who is the god of water, Indra, who controls rain, and so on. And so the theory that was established was that Hindus worship the forces out of fear. Now, how did these Western scholars get their Indian collaborators? There's a very interesting process by which Western academia, what it did was it created huge sources of funding. And in these academia, Indians were co-opted on the condition that they will publish only a certain point of view. And so if your point of view is very different from the point of view which your scholarship in the West or Western university like Columbia is giving you, then you will not get admission there. So they have built a whole ecosystem of Indians who are now leading this particular attack on the Vedas through different publications, and it's largely an academic attack. Now, this attack is coming from what we call as the linear worldview of Christianity. And let me state what it means. So the Western worldview, which originates or which has its roots in Christianity, is that the more older the things are, the more primitive they are. And there's a linear view of time, which means that today we are much more evolved than we were, say, 100 years back, than we were 300 years back, than say 1,000 years back, and at 7,000 years back, we were very, very unevolved. So today we are more evolved than the past, and in the future, we will be more evolved than the present. This is a linear worldview, which shows that the arrow of time is only one way, which means we were very primitive, we started becoming smarter and smarter, and at some point, we have become much smarter than we were earlier, and at some point, we will become much more smarter than what we are now. Now, this worldview is different from the Vedic worldview. In the Vedic worldview, the time is not seen as linear. It is seen as circular. What it means is that civilizations rise, they fall, they rise again. And this circular worldview is reflected in a lot of our Vedic lore as well. For example, there's a process of creation. The Vedic cosmology starts with a process of creation and dissolution and then creation again, which is essentially very, very circular in nature. So in the linear worldview, anything that is old is considered primitive, and the Western worldview cannot reconcile with the fact that an older civilization could have very, very advanced levels of knowledge. So with this, what I will do is to bring out some elements, because it's not possible to bring out all the elements. What I have done is I have brought out some elements of knowledge which is contained in the sciences with respect to physical science. Remember, during the Vedic period, there was no difference between science and spirituality. So there were Vedic rishis who were seers who also spoke about scientifically valid truth. So, for example, if you look at Rig Veda, section 10:22:14, it talks or it tells us that Rig Vedic people knew that the earth moves around the sun. Remember, the Western worldview of earth moving around the sun came only with Galileo, and that too he was prosecuted by the Western church for stating this truth. Not only that, what you will find is that verses which bring out this kind of astronomical truth are often misinterpreted by Western scholars. And there are umpteen examples which I will not bring in here, where they will have twisted the meaning of some key Sanskrit words to give them a different import. So another very interesting part of scientific truth which comes out in the Vedas. So there's a scholar, and this is not directly from the Vedas. There's a scholar called Sayan who was somewhere around Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh in the 14th or 13th century, and he's writing a commentary on Rig Veda. And in that commentary, he gives a very remarkably accurate speed of light at 186,000 miles per second. And this is very, very close to modern calculations. But if you go back to who is credited with finding the speed of light, there's a gentleman called Romer of Foucault who are credited with and this scholar Sayan was predates Foucault and Romer by several centuries. Now, Vedas have their own cosmology also, which has partially been referred to by in Babuji's books on 10 maxims. So Vedas do talk about a primordial vibration, which they then equated it with Om, and then which was converted into sound, which finally led to creation. And that force of that primordial vibration was so high that even today scientists know that the universe is continuing to expand. And these components of this creation and the cosmic theory of creation is very clearly found in Vedas. And there are not one cosmology, but there are several cosmologies which are found in the different Vedic texts. Now, if you look at this chapter in Truth Eternal on Vedas, Lalaji Maharaj talks about the sound of Om and very clearly states that Om is really not a sound, it's the primordial vibration which the rishis converted them into sound for easier understanding. And then he goes on to say all sounds are nothing but Om in fact. And that gives a very, sometimes we may not be able to understand what it means, while he has tried to explain it as best as it is possible. So what he says is that supposing water flows through different channels, it essentially retains the character of water, though it may be flowing through different channels. So to clarify on what that really means, that all sounds are forms of Om, we'll go back to an Upanishadic story which is there in the Vedas, where a disciple asks a guru of what is God. And to answer that question, the guru tells his disciple that please go ahead and pluck a guava from a tree which was nearby. And this disciple brings the guava to the guru. So the guru asks him, he says, what is inside this? Please cut this. And the student cuts it. The guru then asks him, what is inside this guava? The student says, sir, this is seeds inside the guava. He said, okay, take out a seed. So he takes out the seed. Then he says, okay, cut the seed. So the student cuts the seed, and the guru asks him, what is inside this seed? The student says, there's nothing inside the seed. He said, you are right. There is nothing inside the seed, but from that seed has come this huge guava tree. So like this primordial vibration, which we now represent, which was converted by rishis into the Om sound and also an Om symbol, is nothing but that primordial vibration, which is the root of all sound. And we might have heard a lot of times that Sanskrit is the language of God, and we perhaps do not understand what that means. Now, similarly, just like Om was converted from a vibration into a sound, the Sanskrit language is also not a language in the conventional sense as understood in the West. The language of Sanskrit came through because, again, these Vedic rishis, when they sat down and they thought of a particular object, let's say they thought of a bull, they would get a vibration. And that vibration they would convert into sound. And once so all the words in the Sanskrit language, they're essentially derived again from that primordial vibration which came to these rishis in a state of higher consciousness. So do understand that Vedas have been under attack. They have their own science, they have their own cosmology, they have their own literature, they have their own. Now, if you look at spirituality and natural laws in the Vedas, the Vedanta also theorizes something very, very important. And that is the oneness of the universe. According to Vedanta, the entire universe is one. It comes out of that one primordial vibration, which we call as Om. And sometimes our normal consciousness does not tell us, or it does not give us this feeling of oneness of the universe. In other words, the idea of this oneness of universe is not our normal consciousness. So, what is the proof that this Vedantic idea of the oneness of universe found in the Vedas is actually correct? And here I will offer two evidence. The first evidence comes from people who have gone into deep meditation. They would have experienced at some point the idea of being one with everything else. And it's a fleeting feeling which lasts for minutes. And I would still consider that proof, but that's a weak proof because not all of us would have experienced it. The second proof, and that's a more tangible and easily relatable proof, is when we give a sitting as prefect to a practitioner in Sahaj Marg or in heartfulness, there is something very important which is happening in the hearts of the practitioner. His or her consciousness is actually changing. Now, imagine in the physical world, if two systems, two computers are not interconnected, then there is no data exchange which is possible between these two computers. The connection may be wireless, but it has to be there. In a similar way, if there was no connection between two humans, it was not possible for one human to act in a way that would change the consciousness of the second human. And that should give us a very important pointer that we are all as human beings connected. And this comes up also in what we call as Atharved. Atharved describes that unity and oneness of this universe in greater detail. Interestingly, as quantum physics developed in the 20th century, all the great scientists who discovered quantum theory, which is Schrodinger, Heisenberg, Einstein, they had interestingly gone through Vedanta. And I'm just giving you here, and they were very impressed by Vedanta because what they were finding was very similar to the ideas contained in the Vedas. So here I'm just quoting Schrodinger, from whom we derive is what is called the Schrodinger equation in quantum physics. It's the starting point of quantum physics. It says Vedas teaches us that consciousness is singular, dash dash, and are played out in one universal consciousness, and there is no multiplicity of selves. The stages in the development are to strive for earth, knowledge, ability. And this quote tells you how deeply all these scientists have accepted that some of the natural laws, as described in the Vedas, have been, we are moving, modern science is discovering some of these natural laws. So my idea in this entire talk was to get you interested in our larger spiritual tradition, of which Sahaj Marg is also a part, of which heartfulness is also a part. We are just one speck in the entire universe, which our Vedas lead to. In other words, the Vedas lead us to a spiritual life, and Sahaj Marg is one of the components which ultimately derives its strength from the Vedas. And I encourage all of you to not only get interested in this topic, but do your own research to come up with your own ideas, and based on your consciousness, study this in greater detail. So thanks a lot, all of you, for hearing. We will